Alrighty, so welcome. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about the MCAT. I'm just going to briefly introduce just the general overview of the test, registering for the test, studying for the test. We'll touch on all those basic points. Feel free to ask questions along the way. I will try to interject those answers as we go. You can use the chat box or you can pipe up with the microphone, whatever your choice is. So without further ado, let's get started. So here's the agenda we have for today. We're going to talk first about registration and then get into the more specifics about the test. So registering for the MCAT. First thing you got to do when you register for the MCAT is you have to apply to get an AMC ID. I don't know why they call it applying to take the test or applying for an AMC ID. It's just really you sign up for your test. You sign up for the test. You sign up for an AMC ID. The word apply there is a little bit silly. So the MCAT is only offered certain months of the year, January and then March through September. And the AMC just released, and you should all be on the AMC Twitter feed, which their @ is AMC_MCAT. And follow them there because they love to do announcements on that page. So they just announced that they've released a schedule for 2021 that you will be able to find on the AMC main website, also on our MedPrep page. I have it posted there as well. That's a MedPrep Facebook group. So if you want to head over to Facebook, you can jump on that as well. And it gives the test dates for next year. They are going back to the traditional, regular old 8-hour MCAT. Which actually is a good thing. I think people are a little bit missing the 6-hour version of the test, but it really was not 6 hours. You really had almost the same amount of time investment. The 8-hour test is just easier to prepare for overall. They are going to be holding it twice a day at testing centers, which means they're going to have a 7:30 administration and a 3 p.m. administration. So 7:30 in the morning and a 3 p.m. In the afternoon. So you would have to choose between those two start times. Registration begins in November for just the January and March tests. So if you want to get a January-March test date, you need to be registering in November, like right when that thing opens. So check out all the details around it. You can pre-register and then you do your official registration. I'm not sure what pre-registration means. This is the first time they've really done this. So they've made some changes to how the registration system is going to work. Then later in the year, once we get to 2021, they're going to open it up for the April, May, and June tests. And then they're going to have a third date to register for the July, August, and September tests. I believe they're doing this because of the just disastrous registration process that they had this past year. And so they're limiting the window for tests that can be registered. So hopefully probably to reduce the traffic for registering for the tests. So that is a pretty major change of how things have been done. So if you see different information, it's probably because of the recent changes. So I want you to refer to the AMC's website for all the current information there. While this says 2020 registration fees, I have verified that they are in fact still the same. So the fee for the test is still $320, and they are not going to be charging, at least for the January and March tests, rescheduling fees. So that's something that's going to hold over because of COVID, at least through March. We don't know beyond that they haven't actually said outside of that. I would encourage you, if you need the assistance to apply for the fee assistance program, they call it FAP on their website. So head over to the AMC, find the FAP application, and see what you can get. If you do qualify for fee assistance, it of course lowers the registration fee, but you also, here's the super benefit, you also get the AMC online bundle test prep materials for free. You don't have to pay for them. So you get 4 practice tests, the section banks, and the question banks that they have available online. If you do need to apply for accommodations, give yourself an extra 3 months before the test, before registering for the test, to get the accommodations. It seems excessive, right now, but that's because everything is going very slowly. I've had people wait almost 6 months to find out the final word on their accommodations on this test. Accommodations being things like extra time, um, having a reader, a screen reader, or other things like that. I will say that if you had accommodations in the past in high school, you're more likely to get accommodations on the MCAT. If you only got accommodations for the first time in college, what will probably be necessary is to visit with an educational psychologist and get evaluated for your need for accommodations. They won't give it to you otherwise. Just getting a letter from Davis's Office of Disabled Students saying that you got accommodations on exams at Davis is not enough. They're going to ask for more documentation than that. So give yourself plenty of time to get that documentation in order if you need it. So that's part of that thinking ahead process of signing up for accommodations. Can you retake the MCAT? Oh, yes. Yes, you can. You can't be registered for more than one test at a time. But you can register, like basically you walk out to the testing center and you can register for another test. That's actually a pretty common thing for people to do, is just go ahead and get registered for an additional test before their score comes back, just in case. So like if the test didn't go well and you don't get a desirable score, you always have that next one scheduled in advance. So just in case you have to redo it. Is retaking the MCAT a bad thing? You'll see on things like Reddit and Student Doctor Network and whatever that, oh, it's like the worst thing in the world to retake an MCAT. It's going to really affect you badly on your application. But I'm here to say, no, it doesn't. The worst thing in the world is actually retaking and getting a lower score. But if you retake and get a higher score or even about the same score, nobody's going to question that. Like they would question, why would you retake and get a lower score? That's the thing that they would question. But if you take it 2 or even 3 times, which is the only amount that you can take within 1 year is 3 times, that's not really going to affect your application. You can't take it more than 4 times in a 2-year period, and you can't take it more than 7 times total. I don't know anybody in recent history that has taken it 7 times, so it usually doesn't get to that point. Do med schools see all your scores? Yes, they do, because med schools are part of the AAMC, and the MCAT is produced by the AAMC. So all MCAT scores are going to be available to all of the schools should they want to look at them. So yes, all your scores do count. Some schools will do what they call super scoring, where they take your highest sections, but that's not very common. And that's usually if you're a pretty solid candidate elsewhere and they just want to, you know, we'll just get them in kind of thing. All right. So can't get my buttons to work. There we go. So what does the test look like? And here's a little bit about the timing and the sections. So the test begins 7:30 a.m. You're going to roll in, and actually I would suggest you get there at 7 a.m. or 2:30 p.m. Get there a half hour early so you're the first person in line. Because you don't want to be the person that starts last. You want to be the person that starts first and gets done first. Plus, if you're standing in line, like with other people, like for the longer period of time, it's just going to serve to get you all stressed out. So if you're the first person in line, that's the best place to be. So beginning of the test, you get this optional tutorial. You should definitely use it. Not as a tutorial, but as a chance to just get yourself settled and relaxed and getting into test taking mode. Because at this point, you should probably have taken at least 5 or more practice tests before going into the real thing. You should not actually need to use the tutorial for the tutorial purposes, because you will know how the test functions. It's just a good time to get yourself settled. Then you get your first science section, which is 95 minutes of 59 questions. Some are passage based, some are going to be discrete, or what you might hear of as called freestanding questions. You have roughly 1.5 minutes per question. You have 10 passages, so if you take that timing, you have about 8 minutes per passage, assuming you are going, assuming you're spending only about 1 minute on the freestanding questions, the discretes. So there's some strategy that goes into doing each of these sections. And that's actually something we talk about in our test prep 102 sessions, which just started this week. I'll give you guys the next couple sessions on that if you want to start attending those as well. Are all the questions multiple choice? Yes, they are. There's 4 choices and there's no guessing penalty. So you should give an answer to every single question, even if it's a guess, because you might get lucky and get credit for a question that you didn't actually know. So yes, all multiple choice. Then you get a 10-minute break, take your breaks, get up, go to the bathroom, like just stare at the wall for 5 minutes during your break, whatever it takes, just clear your mind and be mindful of your emotional state during the test. The more stressed you are, the worse it's going to be. So if you can just like maintain control over your attitude and your mental state, you're much more likely to do well on a test like this. So that's a big part of any standardized test, but the MCAT, especially because it's such a marathon of a test, because you've got to be there all day. So taking those breaks is very, very important. Then you get into CARS, which is critical analysis and reasoning skills. You hear everybody refer to CARS, and it's really just the reading comprehension section. For all intents and purposes, you've got 90 minutes of 53 questions and 9 passages. So that's roughly, I don't know how I got my math there to say 9 minutes per passage, because 90 minutes divided by 9 is 10 minutes a passage. So that's a typo. I'll get that fixed. So 10 minutes of passage is what you have roughly for on average for the passages. That amounts to 1.75 minutes per question, which is actually a pretty huge amount of time. That's a surprisingly long amount of time. So while the test seems like it's a drudgery, you actually have a lot of excess time on it that it didn't used to have. So the test used to be shorter, and it also had less time per question. It used to be more like 1 minute to 1.25 minutes per question rather than what it is now. So in 2015, they actually made it a little bit nicer on people. Then you get your 30-minute mid-exam break. Don't think of it as lunch, but you should have a snack. Don't be bringing like a full sushi plate or something like that. Just stick to a snack. Complex carbs and protein is your best bet there. Lay off the energy drinks and the caffeine laden stuff for a while you're prepping for the MCAT, because you don't want to have that crash right after your mid-exam break. Then you get your biochem right after the break, which is the science sections are all built the same. You get another break, and then you do your psych soc. So psych soc is last. I personally think that's because it's actually the section with the highest average score. People tend to do best on that section anyway, so they're probably just trying to bring that score down a little bit by putting it last. You get 3 minutes to decide whether or not you're going to void your test. It's the big shiny red button of the exam. And it's a very tempting button, because how are you guys going to feel when you finish this thing? Zombified? Stressed? You're not going to feel good. Like, it's not going to feel like I did awesome on this test. Most people don't feel that way. I have seen a few that do, but most people don't feel that way. And it's very tempting to say like, oh man, if I just void it, I could do it again and do much better. But there's only a couple reasons why I would suggest ever to click the void button and never do it for any other reason. The void button is good for when you're extraordinarily ill during the test. Like you had to get up in the middle of a section and go to the restroom and take care of business, something like that. Or there's like a really obnoxious thing that happened at the testing center, like the power went out for 2 hours or 3 hours, or the internet dropped out for 1 or 2 hours. And because what happens is they don't call that a testing abnormality. You will have to wait there without your phone, mind you. So you got to wait and not talk with anybody and just sit there until the things get reset, like get put back in. And you may actually have to go back and redo a couple questions. You never know if it didn't save them or whatever. And as long as you can finish the test day, they will call that a perfectly valid administration. Most people that I know, after sitting around for 1 to 2 to 3 hours without anything to keep them entertained other than their own minds, tend to really super stress, and then the rest of the exam goes very poorly. So that would be another time where a void is a reasonable option. The truly optional thing, in my opinion, is that satisfaction survey at the end. If you want to do it, do it. If not, fine, don't do it. It's not worth the time. So that's your choice at the end of the day. So it's a long test, it's a marathon test, and there's a lot of different content area on it. So how does this thing get scored? So every year in about March, they release the scoring grid for April to the next April. So right now we're still on the scoring grid that was released in March of this year. And what the scoring grid means is it's not a curved test. It's a scaled test, as we call it. They take test data from the beginning of the test. So like from 2015 until now, they take the test data, especially from the January and March administrations. They use that to reevaluate, is the test scale still giving appropriate scoring ranges for people? And so they modify it a little bit. Every once in a while, the percentiles will shift a little bit one way or the other. Like you can see here that right now, I know it's a little tiny, but right now a 501 is a 51st percentile, a 500 is a 47th percentile. When the test first came out, 500 was 50th percentile. So there's been some upward drift in these percentiles because people are doing better on the test than they had originally anticipated. So most tests do this nowadays. They're not curved, so it doesn't matter who took the test that day that you took it. There's no like better day of the year to take the test. It's just they're just doing statistical magic with all this stuff. The range itself for each section is 118 to 132, with a 125 being approximately a 50th percentile because it's the middle of the range. They add that all up and you get your test range of 472 to 528, with a 500 being approximately a 50th percentile. Again, like I said, there's drift in there. There are going to be unscored experimental questions in there, but you don't know which ones they are. In fact, that's how they actually made the MCAT for the COVID times, is they just took the experimental questions out. So we know now that at least 2 of the science passages are experimental, and 1 of the cars passages is experimental, because they went down to 8 science and 8 cars during the COVID test. So it's very possible that that's the only experimental passages that are in there, but they're in there so they're testing questions for the next year. They're just not going to identify them for you guys. They're not going to tell you which ones you have. I will also say this about the test. Your test will be different than your neighbor's test. They pull from a testing bank, which means the same questions are not delivered to every single person. So you're not supposed to talk about the content of your test with other people, and you actually sign a non-disclosure agreement of when you take the test that you will not discuss the contents of the test with anybody. And so even if you did, you wouldn't be able to talk. We'd be talking about the same test anyway, because you're going to have different stuff than the person next to you. So there's that. And as I said, there's no guessing penalty. So what's a reasonable score range for people to have? So here I have the data from AA comas for DO schools. This is a little outdated. I don't know why they still haven't released their 2019 matriculant data, and it's almost time for re-releasing the 2020 matriculant data. So we'll see what happens there. But the average MCAT for people matriculating into DO school in 2018 anyway was a 504. A very attainable score for most people. For MD schools, it's a little bit different. This is coming from AMCAS data. It's a 512, 511, 512, sort of halfway in between there. And again, that's not that. It's a little more difficult to get into that 512 range, but I want to emphasize that these numbers that I'm showing you, these are averages, which means people below average get in all the time. I've even seen people with like 520s and 4.0 GPAs not get into med school because the rest of their application was just awful. All they did was academics, and they didn't do any experiences. They had no clinical time. Like all that other stuff is just as important as these metrics of the GPA and the MCAT score. So don't be like looking at your 508 going like, oh God, I don't have a chance. I don't have a chance at all. No, you totally have a chance with the 508. 507. I've seen 504s getting into MD, right? So it's it'd be nice. It makes you more competitive to have that higher MCAT score, but it does not make you unable to get into med school. If you got other good looking things in your application, because the med school process is more, what's the word? More, oh goodness, what's the word I'm looking for? More holistic. They are using a more holistic model for investigating things. Your MCAT does not have that much bearing on your overall performance getting into school. So don't go crazy trying to get 520 or something like that. You don't really need it unless you're going to some place like Stanford. Stanford, like I think their average is a 523 this year. That's huge. That's insane because the highest you can get is 528. So yeah, places like Stanford, that's a little bit crazy. Yeah, right. The highest in the nation is actually, might surprise you guys, it's Worcester, Washington University in St. Louis, and they're the highest MCAT average in the country. It's just, it blows my mind. How do people get these scores regularly? It just, I don't even know. All right, what is on the test? The sciences that are tested are biochemistry. It'll be covered on the chem phys and the biochem. So your basic, classic basics, central dogma, metabolism, protein trafficking, et cetera, et cetera. General chemistry will be on the test. Not a lot of math, so like I know people really stress out about things like calculating pHs and calculating cell potentials and like using the Nernst equation. No, you're not going to be using things like the Nernst equation. The most calculation heavy stuff you're going to get is like using the Henderson-Hasselbalch equation to figure out like how much is the pH going to change when you add acid to a buffer, or doing PV equals nRT calculations, things like that. They don't really have a lot of hard calculations like I think a lot of people are afraid of. I'll take a break from the content for a second to address that question. Right now, a lot of schools are actually saying the MCAT is optional just for this year. We don't know what next year is going to entail, because since it was so hard to take a test this year, even if you were registered for one, it might have been canceled repeatedly. So like people that are putting their applications this summer, they were told, try to take the MCAT. If you can't, it's okay. We'll still look at your application. So the MCAT was optional for that reason. I am not convinced that that is going to be the case next year, because AMC is going to great lengths to make sure that they're not going to have to cancel exams next year. So I do not believe that the MCAT will be optional for this upcoming cycle. The current cycle that we're pretty much towards the end of had that sort of special thing. All right, back to content. Organic chemistry, most of which is not stuff you actually, like most of the organic you learned is not actually super necessary for this test. Remember all those benzene reactions? Remember all those alkene and alkyne reactions? Remember Diels-Alder? All those special reactions with double bonds? They're not covered on the MCAT. It's basically SN1, SN2, E1, E2, and carbonyl reactions. Things like aldol condensations and aldol reactions, and add a nucleophile to a carbonyl, what do you get? That's primarily where the OChem is coming from, and some nomenclature, understanding isomers. And I think the part that most people have the least knowledge on is actually the ice separation identification techniques. So they have a lot of questions that involve chromatography and which compound would be, or which technique would be best used to separate these two compounds from each other, or to distinguish one from another. So that's probably where you're going to have to spend more of your time focusing in the OChem, is learning up some techniques that you just don't know. Physics, I've grayed out kinematics recently, because kinematics has really taken a back seat. Kinematics being the big five equations where you're calculating projectile motion, because it's really hard to work kinematics into a biological system, because everything is biologically couched now. You're not just gonna have a Wile E. Coyote jumping off a cliff kind of stuff on the test. So it's hard to work kinematics into biological relevant things. I would not worry so much about kinematics at this point. Forces, more important. Work energy, the most important. Fluids, circuits, and light and sound. Mostly because these are directly applicable to biological systems. Fluids, the lungs, the circulatory system. Circuits, how neurons work, how cell membranes work. Light and sound, of course, ears and eyes, all that kind of fun stuff. Then we've got our biology, which is more or less your general bio classes. Is it helpful to take a physiology class? Yes. Is it helpful to take a micro class? Yes. Is it helpful to take genetics? Yes. The class that is not necessary and that many med schools do not require is anatomy. There's not that much anatomy on the MCAT, and you do not need to know it at the level that your anatomy class here at Davis would take you. So that's the one thing I think you can downplay. You get psychology, which Psych 1 and Psych 41 are both, I honestly think Psych 41 is a better class for this, because Psych 41 goes into the experimental side of experimenting with humans and what that looks like. And that's actually a pretty big topic on the Psych Soc section. Sociology, on the other hand, not super relevant because there's very few Soc questions on the test, and what there are is basically social psychology, which you would have covered in a Psych 1 class. So that's in general what the content of the test looks like. I'm going to skip ahead in the slides just a second, just to say the classes that I suggest you have before you take your MCAT would be this list. So taking all of the pre-med, the common pre-med classes, I have cell biology, immuno, and anatomy grayed out because those aren't really super necessary for this test, but the other ones really would help you prepare. So if you can have all of these done before you start prepping, before you take your MCAT, you're probably in the best place, which is why taking it between your junior and senior years is kind of ideal, because you'll probably have most of these done at that point. Soc, I'm willing to gray out because I just said that I don't think it's super duper relevant, but you know, if you have it, it's helpful. If it's not, if you don't have it, you're going to be fine. So let's take a deeper dive into the content itself and look at this. Mathematics, there's not a whole lot of math. The math you're going to have is all stuff you're going to have to be able to do without a calculator. So, which should tell you something. Can you calculate logs without a calculator to many decimal points? No. So the expectation for like doing pH questions is like single unit, like changes of powers of 10, because you can't do the math any more specific than that. So that's like a great example of why you don't see a lot of these deep, hard math questions, because no calculator means they've got to keep it simple enough to do in a short amount of time. Really, the math that they're really expecting you to have is high school level, algebra 2 at the most type content. Very rarely will they have a sine, cosine, or tangent thing in there, but you should know your cardinal angles there, like the sine of 30, cosine of 30, cosine of 40, and those types of things. And just understand how vectors work. So head to tail, guys, head to tail. I just taught you everything you need to know about vectors for the MCAT. So notice there's a knowledge of dot and cross products not required. So the math, don't let the math scare you. And in fact, most questions where you think you might have to do math, you could probably solve it without doing actual math. I call it MCAT math because just look at the multiple choice answers and you can usually see like 2 of them are just ridiculous and one of them starts with the wrong number. So like that's the style of math you have here. Here's the chemical and physics, and I'm not going to go through each one of these things, but I wanted to show you like what it is, how they combine it together in sections. So this isn't just chemistry and physics. It's also got blood in there. It's also got gas movement, gas exchange. It's how they're couching all of the passages in biological clothing. So you don't have pure chemistry or pure physics passages anymore. You have a passage about the circulatory system, which might bring in a question about fluid dynamics. And at the same time, I might also have a pH question in there for, how the pH of the blood varies. So it's primarily biology with a little bit of a sprinkling in of these other subjects. The same for the biochem section. They've got 3 concepts here where they're just really looking for, again, sort of the integration of all these different topics that they're covering. The biochemistry, one of the things I want to warn you against there, going too deep down the rabbit hole, is memorizing cycles. Like, you don't have to memorize all of glycolysis and all of gluconeogenesis and all of glycogenesis and all of glycogenolysis and Krebs and da-da-da-da-da. Like, know in general how they work. They will likely give you a diagram on the test if they needed you to know anything more specific. So, like, while for class you might have to have those kinds of things memorized, for the MCAT, it's not about as much about memorizing as it is understanding conceptually how things work and interplay with each other. That's you want to be more integrating in your studying for this particular test. There are some things I do suggest that you do memorize in this section, and that's your amino acids. So if you start memorizing your amino acids, like single letter, 3-letter structure, PIs, acidic, basic, neutral, that kind of thing, that's good. And your hormones. Know where the hormone is made, know where the hormone acts, know why the hormone is made, know what it does, and know that for, like, there's a page in pretty much every bio textbook for the MCAT that just is a list of hormones and that information. Get that memorized so that you don't have to be fighting with that and struggling. Like, you don't want to have to be like, what does aldosterone do again? What does that do? I can't remember. So you just want to be like more of a instant recall kind of thing. The Psych Soc, they split it into actually 5 categories, which is really funny to me. The first one is the most biological, where they'll have like vision. They could actually bring brain chemistry into this section because they talk about how neurons work, or how does the ear sense sound in this section. So everything from sensation to behavior to how behaviors help us self-identify, and then getting into the more sociological things of like, okay, now we look at how these behaviors group together and lead to communities. And then of course they have social inequality here as its own special category because of, this is one of the reasons why they threw it on here was because of the problems of social inequality in medicine today. They also break it down a different way. So the types of questions they're going to ask are the CARS and the SIRS. So there's CARS, which is the critical analysis and reasoning skills. It's your reading comp skills, which really come in 3 types of questions. Retrieval type questions, where you're finding the information and just finding it in the answer, finding the passage, finding the answer. Where you find information in the text and then you use it to answer a question, like what was the author thinking. Or reasoning beyond the test, where you go find the information and then you have to like say, what would the author think about this new thing? So they take it to the next step. These are the hardest questions. These are the simplest questions. Foundations is simple compared to reasoning beyond. And reasoning beyond, there's most of the, like 40% of the questions on the section are reasoning beyond. It's 40, 30, 30. So of course they're going to make the hardest kind of questions the most common. Same with SIRS, the scientific inquiry and reasoning skills. So you don't hear people normally talk about SIRS because they just talk about chem, phys, bio, but there's 4 basic types of questions they're asking you to do here. And again, this is more like the fact recall kind of questions with knowledge of scientific concepts. Scientific reasoning problem solving, these are the harder kind. And of course, there's the most of these types of questions. And these are taking your knowledge and applying it to a new problem, to a new scenario. The design and execution of research, there are about 10% of the questions are this, but 10% adds up. And this is where Psych 41 can really pay off. Because Psych 41 really does help you understand how experiments function, because the name of the class is actually research methods. And that's pretty much what they're asking here. And then database and statistical reasoning, this is reading figures, learning what the figure is saying to you. I get this question a lot of like, is there any way I can get better at reading figures and understanding what figures tell me? Because the figures can get quite complex. I would suggest this. You all have an account at the library. You can log in using the, you have to download the VPN if you haven't already done so. And then access the either science or nature, one of those two journals every month, download a copy of it, download the PDF of it, and read the first couple articles in it every month. Because it's that kind of content that the MCAT usually has on the test, that level of reading also. So it's a good way to get good at reading complex information that's relevant to you, and you might actually learn something from it, and also get better at working on figures, like getting information out of figures. Like may sound a little cheesy, but have like a reading party with some of your friends. Like every month, say, okay, we're going to read up this article, and then we're going to discuss this article together. Get on a Zoom call and discuss the contents of the article. The more of that you can do right now, the better. Some of you, how many people are here doing research? Or would be doing research if COVID wasn't happening right now? So for you guys, there's actually that group read thing is probably already something that you have going on in your research groups. Volunteer to present an article at your group meeting. And I'm sure your PI would jump at the chance to help you do that. Most PIs are really happy when undergraduates excuse me, when undergraduates step up and say they want to participate at that level in their research group. So that's something you could do as well that makes it also very much more relevant, because you can get the PI's help in trying to understand what some of those crazy figures mean and what they're writing about. So there's all kinds of options for like practicing reading this style of things you can do that you're basically, so you can prep before you actually prep. For cars, excuse me, one of the things you can do here is do puzzles, word search puzzles, those kind where you have the loop the word. That flexes your skill of finding words fast, finding things fast in a dense morass of letters. The other thing you might try is logic grid puzzles. Those little logic grid puzzles, they give you a bunch of clues, and you have to figure out who went to the store with what car and on what day. Those types of puzzles, they're actually really good because the car section makes you do that. It's a lot of deductive reasoning where you get a clue and you have to say, okay, what does this clue tell me? It says this is wrong, but this is right. So strangely enough, that's good MCAT practice when you're not really studying for the MCAT. So something you can do now as a freshman or sophomore, or even a third year that hasn't really gotten to start their MCAT studying yet. So we went through the prerequisites. I'll skip that. What are some prep resources out there for you besides this stuff? You can just go to the internet. There is a lot of MCAT companies out there. This is not even all of them. I just have some of the more common ones you've probably run into. Altius, Berkeley Review, Blueprint, formerly known as Next Step, although they're really trying to get people to stop using Next Step. Exam Crackers, Kaplan Test Prep, Med School Coach, Princeton Review, UWorld, Khan Academy, official content that the AMC puts out. That's the online bundle. Like there's tons of material out there. And at the end, actually, yeah, at the end, I'll post in the chat box a link to my MCAT prep organizer where I try to organize all of this stuff in one place to show you like, okay, here's what here's what you can get from Altius, here's what you can get from Berkeley Review, here's what, and so on, because it can be a little overwhelming on what materials you need. Overall, you need a set of content review books. You need some source of online practice problems. Paper's not good enough these days because you got to get good at taking it online. You need a source of online practice tests in addition to the AMC official MCAT bundle. The MCAT bundle that AMC puts out really only consists of like 1 month of work if you do it as section based. If you do one section worth of material at a time. So it's not enough to use just the AMC materials most of the time. Khan Academy has free stuff, but you get what you pay for, which is it's not the best in the world, but it's pretty good if you can't afford other things. UWorld is a fairly cheap way to get practice problems. The rest of these companies, you can just a la carte buy content from them. You don't have to take a course. So if you decide to go to self-prep route, then that's a good way to go. Hold on a second. I have to get the and you can only access this prep organizer from a Davis email account. So that's because it's for Davis students. Not saying there's anybody in here that's not from Davis, although that has happened in the past. But I made this for you guys, not for everybody else. So here's the link. Should take you right over to the spreadsheet. How do you decide self-prep versus doing assisted prep? How do you make that decision? How do you decide between prep classes and tutoring? Sometimes it's money. Sometimes it's the cash that goes into it. And you'll also see I have a lot of discount codes in the spreadsheet if you go to the spreadsheet. But I also have some other discount codes that I'm not allowed to share to the wide world. So if you're ever just wondering, can I get a prep class for less money, or do private tutoring for less money, let me know. We'll talk about it with me, set up an appointment, and we can discuss it and try to get you into a situation that works. Like, we even have some full ride scholarships that we have available that we give to people that are in very big need for that. So we have options to help make some of this cheaper. Not everybody needs a prep class or tutoring though. So to decide whether you need to go that route, take a practice test. In fact, I'm going to have a link on the screen in just a few seconds, or for just a few minutes, that is, or not a link, but a reminder that we are holding a mock MCAT in 2 weeks. So it doesn't hurt to go ahead and try taking the test. Take it cold. You're not going to do great. It's not like you're going to expect to get a 512 on it doing it cold, but it can help give you an idea of, number one, what you're studying for. Number two, what it is that you need to work on. There's a link on our website, hpa.ucdavis.edu/testprep. So you'll head there and look for the link to our sign-up sheet for that. Oops, wrong place. And I just screwed up the spreadsheet. Hold on. There we go. Close that up. All right. So back in this window. What should your timeline look like? That's part of what the prep organizer is here to do, is to help you work a timeline. What I suggest, if you're going to do the summer, don't be in classes at the time. Do have a job or have a volunteering experience you can do to sort of take your mind off it, but you kind of want to devote yourself 4+ hours a day, like treat it like it's a full-time job for 3 months. If you stretch it out over a longer period of time, you don't have to spend that much time studying. Make sure your studying is effective, meaning don't study for 3 to 4 hours straight. Study for an hour, and then study for 2 hours, and then study for an hour. Break it up into smaller study sessions. Turn it into a class for yourself. Like, make yourself a MCAT class schedule and break it down into different components. Like, I'm going to be doing my car studying in the morning, and then I'm going to do a section of passages, and then I'm going to do some reading, something like that. Another thing that I very much want to emphasize is practice is the best way to get better at this test. Don't just do content review for like 2 months and then expect that right after you do that, you take your first practice test, you're going to have an awesome score. It doesn't work that way. You have to get good at using the content in context. So I always encourage people to balance content review with practice right up front. do some content review, do some practice problems. They don't even have to be practice problems on the same content. It's just practice problems. And in fact, when you make mistakes on the practice problems, it will make you figure out what you do and do not know a whole lot better than just reading a book or watching a video or taking notes and et cetera, et cetera. So get that practice going in there. And I'd say at least 4 or 5 full-length tests. I'm of a mind that taking 10 is a really good number. And there are enough tests out there for free that you can take 10 if you bundle them up with the AMC bundle. So there is a way to take 10 tests without paying all that much money for it. And again, that's what the prep organizer is there to help you figure out. So that's what I've got to say about it. I'm going to open the floor up to questions right now. So here's the link to the website where you'll find the test prep website. So you can sign up for the MCAT, which is coming up this weekend or next weekend, October 24th and October 28th. We're going to review your score reports. So talk about some things that your score report can tell you. We are going to have our next MCAT session tomorrow night for the learning about what the sciences are all about. And then we have our next CARS session next Tuesday. So if you want to attend that, feel free. By all means, you should come on down. So any questions for the bunch, for the group? Oh, I forgot to mention this. Drop-in study hall hours. I actually do drop-ins on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday afternoons from 2 to 5, where I simply, I'm there to help you with test prep things. So don't think you can pop in and have me look at a personal statement or something. I'll tell you no. But this is specifically for people working on, like, they're studying for the MCAT. I can help with content. I can help with strategy, whatever it is. I've been doing the MCAT for a long time, so I'm pretty well versed in all of the sections, so I can help you pretty much anywhere in there. Consider me your MCAT dude. Are the 102 sessions recorded? I'm recording them right now, this quarter, parts of them. So what was I gonna say? Oh, but like the whole sessions with the Q&A at the end and stuff like that, I don't want to make that available because I want people to come to these sessions as much as possible. So I understand that people can't always do that. That's why I'm going to be providing at least the first part, the sort of seminar part of it, instead of and not the whole thing where we're doing, like, where we're actually working passages. Is the drop-in links on the HPA website on your slide? Yes, it's under the test prep study hall. Plus, by the way, a recording, listening to people working a passage is pretty hard to follow because it can't always see what all the questions are and hear what all the questions are and all that stuff. So it's a little hard to follow. That's why I also don't want to include that particular part. Other questions? All right, it seems like we're pretty much wrapped up then. So thank you all for coming today. Hopefully you learned a little bit about the MCAT that you didn't know before, and you're a little bit more ready to get prepped up for this thing. So let me know whatever I can help you do. Right now, I'm booked out for like 2 weeks appointment-wise, so if you can't get an appointment right away, I apologize, but that's why I have those drop-in study hall hours as well. So I hope to see some of you guys there.